Welcome to Sin's Voice. I'm Cindy, your host for tonight. Before we dive into the darkness, I want to take a moment to send a special thank you to all the incredible people who made this video possible. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. Seriously, thank you so much. Now, if you're new here, make sure you hit that bell, give a thumbs up, and of course, subscribe. You won't want to miss what's lurking in the shadows. Trust me, there's always something lurking and waiting. Now, with all of that said, let's begin. Do not play the Ouija board from Chavez Ding 89. For some context, this happened when I was in high school and I was more prone to foolish suggestions. I will never be anywhere near that board again and do not recommend anyone else to play with it. It was supposed to be a casual night. We were happy to be done with school for a while and enjoy our summer vacation. Around midnight, someone mentioned the Ouija board. Nah, I said, shaking my head. I heard enough stories to know it's not something you mess with. But they kept pushing, joking that I was too scared. I laughed it off, but in the back of my mind, a faint unease prickled. I felt like something I shouldn't do, like crossing some invincible line. But eventually, I caved, part of me also excited. We set the board on the coffee table and dimmed the lights, half for effect and half because we thought it was just all a game. We settled around the board, fingers on the planchette, exchanging nervous glances. I could feel that same prickling sense of caution, but I ignored it. It's just a board game, I told myself. Is anyone here? My friend asked, her voice low, almost mocking. Nothing happened at first. We all looked at each other, grinning, but then, just as we were about to give up, the planchette slid, slow and steady, towards yes. We froze, half expecting someone to laugh and admit they were pushing it, but no one did. So, what's your name? My friend asked, trying to keep up with the joking tone, but I could hear the edge in her voice. The planchette didn't move this time, just stayed still as if waiting. After a long silence, I asked, do you want us here? I don't know why I asked that. It just slipped out. And as soon as I said it, I wish I hadn't. Slowly the planchette slid to no. A chill settled over the room, the kind that feels like it's creeping from some deep, cold place. One of my friends laughed nervously, saying it was probably just a joke, or one of my friends laughed nervously, saying it was probably just a joke, or one of us messing around. But nobody looked convinced anymore. I suggested we stop, but someone else brushed it off, saying we were almost done. So we kept going, feeling a little bit braver again, asking questions and joking around, but the atmosphere stayed heavy, like the room was closing in on us. All right, I finally said, ready to end it. Do you want us to leave? The planchette shot to yes. The planchette shot to yes so quickly it made us all jump. We all pulled our hands back, laughing nervously, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that maybe we'd done something we shouldn't have. As we started cleaning up, we noticed that one of the candles had gone out without us noticing, and the air felt colder than it had before. We laughed it off, but the jokes fell flat. When I looked into my friend's face, I could see that they felt it too, that sense of wrongness hanging over us, silent and heavy. The weirdest part? For weeks after that night, I kept feeling like I was being watched. I catch myself glancing over my shoulder, seeing shadows that didn't quite make sense. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Just my mind playing tricks. But deep down, I knew something had shifted that night. Like a door we couldn't see that opened, and something or someone had been watching, waiting, and maybe just maybe it was still there, lingering on the edge of the light. The Game by Let's Split Up. Every year we have this cabin trip, and every year each of us writes a secret and puts it in the hat. After dinner, we dump all the secrets out and start guessing who is whose. It's a fun activity that always teaches us new surprises about each other. Whoever guesses the most secrets correctly wins a basket. What the basket contains is different every year. Everyone donates a gift. This year, for example, my wife donated a box of fancy chocolate so that Kim stops eating yours, she joked to me. Dan often was the winner. A jovial extrovert, he was the glue that kept our friendship together long after college. Melody won the basket nearly as often. An analytical thinker, she kept samples of our handwriting and she usually spends quite a bit of time analyzing the slips of paper to try to ascertain who wrote which secrets. Then there was Yuri, who always made sure the basket had a bottle of very expensive wine. She didn't even drink herself, but she liked the rest of us to have a good time. She was a terrible guesser. Kim was our resident joker, always donated something silly to the basket, like the world's spiciest chip or a giant gummy bear. He won the basket only once before. Steve was the blandest guy imaginable and usually donated something boring, bath product or pistachios or coffee. He never really got our in jokes or quite fit in with the group. Our tradition's been going on strong 10 years now. We've always had a good time, and that's why what happened makes no sense at all. My wife dropped me off at the cabin on Friday evening. Kim, Steve, Dan, and Melody arrived, each putting slips in the hat. Sherry couldn't make it this year, but whined Kim with a note to us to enjoy ourselves. After dinner, we pulled the slips out of the hat, 5 slips of paper with our 5 secrets that read, I have a secret crush on someone. I spent 52 cents on the prize I bought for the basket. I have a star named after me. It's a girl. I'm going to murder one of you. We read them out loud, laughing and shouting, guessing until we got the last one. Everyone went quiet. Someone wondered if it was a joke. We all looked at the resident joker Kim, but he said he had the 52-cent one. Everyone began snatching their slips until each of us was holding a slip except me. It's Mia, they all said. Mia's planning a murder. No, I'm not, I sputtered. I wrote I started a new diet. Who had swapped my secret for the murder one? To say that tensions were high would be an understatement. In the end, Dan suggested we skip the game and share the basket. But everyone's mood was sour except for Kim, who happily ate all the chocolates and drank half of the bottle of wine. I wondered if he really did put that murder slip in there as a prank, just so we wind up splitting the basket and he'd get a share. But the next morning, we woke up and found Kim lying blue faced and wide open in the bed, vomit staining the pillows and the sheets beside him. And suddenly we were all screaming, panicking, wondering which of us one had done it. We hurled accusation while waiting for the police. The wine, said Dan. He was obviously poisoned. It must have been the wine. Maybe it was the chocolate, said Melody. But they weren't even out of the plastic wrapping, I said. It was the wine, Dan insisted. Think about it. One of us wrote that incriminating secret, right? But Zuri got an alibi because she's not here. The police look for someone involved in the game, and she gets away with murder in the perfect crime. Okay, but how does she get the slip of paper into the hat if she was never here? Said Melody. Received the secret again. Steve had a secret crush. Dan's wife was having a little girl. Melody had a star named after her. You know those are scams, right? I told her. Mine was still missing. That's how all the suspicion suddenly turned on me. When the police arrived, everyone was interviewed. I was the prime suspect even after I told the police someone swapped out my secret slip about new diet before we drew them from the hat. I even searched the trash can and recycling, but I couldn't find mine to prove my innocence. The remaining paper were turned over to check for fingerprints. The authority took the wine bottle and what was left of the chocolate box, too. My friends all thought I was the killer. I knew one of them was. Later that evening, I was finally back home and still wondered who had lied. The dog was whining to go out, so I grabbed a coat and took him out. And suddenly everything clicked horrifyingly into place. We had all been right. Dan was right about the perfect alibi. Melody was right about the chocolate, not the ones in the plastic wrap in the basket, but the ones in my bag that were supposed to be mine, that Kim stole like he did every year. And I had been right that my slip of paper had been switched. Fear coursed through me as I pulled a crumbled slip of paper from the pocket. I started a new diet. I'd put on my wife's coat by mistake. The Whistler of the Pines by Letter Brilliant. There's a small, nearly forgotten town tucked away in the northern woods of Maine called Shadewood. It's not on any maps, and if you ask about it nearby towns, the locals will either pretend they don't know it or warn you to stay far away. But Shadewood exists, and so does the creature that stalks its forest, the Whistler of the Pines. I first heard about it from a coworker, Joe, during a late night shift at the factory. Joe wasn't usually one for ghost stories, but this one was different. His voice dropped to a whisper, and his hands trembled as he lit up a cigarette. You ever heard about the Whistler? He asked. I shook my head. Joe leaned closer. It's not like Bigfoot or the Mothman. It doesn't leave tracks or causes accident. It doesn't need to. You hear it first, a whistle, soft, slow, almost like a song. And once you hear it, you're marked. Joe told me how as a teenager he'd gone camping near Shadewood with some of his friends. They heard the whistle on the second night. At first, they thought it was the wind, but it was too deliberate, too melodic. The sound got closer, circling the campsite. One of Joe's friends thought it was someone playing a prank and whistled back. That's when everything went wrong. Joe never explained exactly what happened after, just that his friend disappeared and Joe barely made it out of the woods alive. His eyes glazed over as he recounted running through the forest in his dead of night, the whistle following him, growing louder and louder until it seemed to be inside of his head. He finished his story with a warning. If you hear it, don't listen. Don't whistle back, and for God's sake, don't go looking for it. The story should have scared me off, but instead it intrigued me. I'd always been fascinated by the unexplained cryptids, ghosts, strange disappearance. These were the things that kept me awake at night, scrolling through forums and reading stories. Joe's account was different, though. There was something raw, something terrifying real about it. A few weeks later, I decided to find Shadewood myself. I wasn't going alone, though. My friend Mark was just as into the paranormal as I was, and when I told him about the Whistler, he jumped at the chance to join me. Finding Shadewood was harder than expected. Our GPS lost signal long before we got close, and the road seemed to shrink, the trees pressing closer until their branches nearly scraped the sides of my car. The air was damp and heavy, the kind of air that clings to your skin and fills your lungs with a weight you can't quite shake. The deeper we went, the quieter the world became. Even the hum of the car engine seemed muffled. The town itself was barely a town at all. A handful of crumbling houses, a shuttered general store, and a church that looked like it hadn't been in use in decades. The few people we saw avoided eye contact, shuffling quietly indoors when we passed, their faces pale and drawn, their movement hurried and nervous. When I asked about the Whistler at the general stores, the cashier froze, her face pale. "Leave," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't want to hear it." There was something in her tone, an urgency, a deep seated fear, that made me hesitate. But I wasn't going to leave, neither was Mark. We'd come too far. That night, we set up camp in the woods, far from the town, armed with our cameras, flashlight, and growing sense of unease. It started around midnight. A whistle, faint, distant, drifting through the trees. At first, we thought it was just the wind, but the sound was too deliberate. A slow, repetitive melody. The same four notes over and over. It wasn't coming from any specific direction. It was everywhere. Mark froze, his head cocked to the side. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely audible. Don't, don't whistle back." I don't know, but Joe said, before I could stop him, Mark whistled the same four notes. The forest seemed to change. The air grew heavier, colder, and the whistle stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then it returned louder and closer, the melody shifting slightly as if it were angry. "Mark," I hissed, grabbing his arm, "we need to leave." "Relax," he said, laughing nervously. "It's probably just some animal." But then the whistle changed again. It mimicked Mark's whistle perfectly. The same four notes, but slower, drowned out, almost mocking. My blood ran cold. Mark's smiles flattered. That's weird." The sound grew louder, closer. The trees seemed to stretch taller, their branches twiddling in unnatural ways. Shadow danced just beyond the reach of our flashlight. I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees, a shadow, impossibly tall and thin, his limbs too long and angular, bending in a way that made my stomach churn. "Mark, we have to go," said my voice shaking. "Mark, we have to go," I said, my voice shaking. But Mark was staring through the darkness, his flashlight pointed towards the trees. "I think I see something," he murmured, stepping forward. "Mark, stop!" I grabbed at him, but he shook me off. "Mark, stop!" I grabbed at him, but he shook me off. Then the shadow stepped into the beam of his flashlight. It was tall, impossibly thin, with skin so pale it seems to glow in the dark. Its face, or lack of one, was smooth and featureless. except for his jawed black hole where a mouth should have been. The hole puckered and twitched as it let out another whistle, low and haunting. Mark froze, the color draining from his face. What the? Before he could finish, the creature moved. It didn't run, it didn't lunge, it simply unfolded his long limbs, reaching for him with unnatural grace. The whistle grew deafening, echoing through the trees, twisting into a cacophony, and made my head spin. Run! I screamed. Mark turned, but it was too late. The creature's jagged limbs wrapped around him, pulling him into the shadows. His screams were cut off, replacing by the sickening sound of crackling bones and wet, choking gurgle. I didn't look back. I ran, branches tearing at my skin, the whistle chasing me, growing louder, more insistent. No matter which direction I turned, it was always ahead of me, leading me deeper into the woods. My lungs burned and my legs felt like they'd give out, but I didn't dare stop. Somehow, I broke through the trees and onto the dirt road where we'd parked the car. The whistle faded as I scrambled inside and locked the door. The engine roared to life, and I tore it out of there, not daring to look in the rear view mirror. When I got home, I checked my camera. Most of the photos were blurry, distorted by my frantic movement. But one image stood out. It showed the creature in horrifying details. Its elongated limbs, its hollow face, its jagged mouth mid-whistle, its eyeless gaze seeming to pierce through the screen as if it was looking right at me. Mark was never found. I haven't been back to Shadewood, and I haven't told anyone what I saw. But some nights, when the wind is just right, I can still hear it, a soft, melodic whistle drifting through the air, and I know it's waiting for me to whistle back.